Good morning, everybody. I'm very aware that you can see all of us, but we can't see you, but it's absolutely wonderful to welcome you here today for our live and event about building a successful mobile learning app. Very pleased that you've all made it across the cold weather and the snow. It's fantastic to see so many of you joining us. So again, thank you. Just to introduce myself, so I am Antonia. I am a club executive at And Digital, and the club I run is in London and it's called Club Hamilton. And Digital exists because we can see that the need for digital skills and capability is absolutely fundamental to the success of every organisation, but also that the ability for companies to attract and grow that talent that they need from within is really difficult. So we're here to help close that digital skills gap by working alongside our clients to build the products they need at speed and in parallel build their longer term capabilities. It is my absolute pleasure today, this morning, to welcome with us on the panel Gus and Cassian from Splink Industries and Joelle from And as part of our panel. I'll let them introduce themselves to you in just a minute. Before that, I will just outline some ground rules and how we'll run the panel this morning, so it's really clear to everyone. So for today's event, we've prepared about 10 questions that we will sort of run through first, but we would absolutely love questions from the audience as well. So if you do have questions that spring to mind as we're going along in our conversation, do please put those in the Q&A interactive box. What will happen is questions will pop up, and if you see a question you like, you can also tag onto those, and those will make it rise in terms of priority order in which I ask them to our panel. In terms of housekeeping then, everyone at the moment is on mute. Don't try and unmute yourselves because you'll get in a weird vortex of trying to do it and it won't let you because only the panel are actually unmuted. Like I say, put questions in that Q&A box, and then we will ask those as we go along. We are recording the event today, but as I said, your faces actually can't be seen, so don't worry too much about that. But after the event, you will receive a copy of the recording and also a feedback survey with our contact details on too. We would love your feedback, really just to make these events better as we go along, so please do share that. So without further ado, I would love to hand over to Joelle, my colleague, so he can tell you a little bit about himself.
Perfect. Thanks, Antonia. So I'm Joel. I'm a service delivery lead at Club DVSA. So my role within And is to support the portfolio of our delivery engagements. So, and then to work to kind of consolidate the relationship we have with clients like Splink and Gus and Cassian. So I joined And about 4 years ago now, and I was kind of attracted by the vision that And had around closing the digital skills gap, and doing that in a way that still put people front and center of the strategy. So that's what actually brought me in. Before that, I've been kind of working in big consultancy firm around a mix of delivery role and a bit of account management. And then I moved from France to actually join And here in the UK because I was kind of so, let's say, passionate by kind of the vision that they had. At And, I've been quite, let's say, lucky to see quite a big range of deliveries, like ranging from very small to big delivery, be it kind of refactoring of existing product, or in our case here, actually building a new product from the get-go. So actually really excited to have been part of the journey. So that's me.
Thanks, Joelle. And so over to Gus and Cassian, if you'd like to introduce yourselves and Splink.
Shall I go first, Gus? I'm Cassian. Hello, lovely to meet you all. Although, as said, I can't actually see you all, but I hope you're all having a lovely time as the snow falls. So I'm Cassian Harrison. My background actually is a bit lateral. Actually, my principal background is television production. First of all, making documentaries, and then working at the BBC in commissioning around factual content, and then ultimately running BBC 4. the BBC's smallest but most perfectly formed channel, as I tend to say. And actually currently now I work in the commercial arm of the BBC as looking after global services, building new services for the BBC. But alongside that, I've always had a really strong interest in digital technology, and we'll get into more detail about that and how that crosses over the kind of my BBC history. I did kind of various bonkers things like working for Sun Microsystems when they still existed, doing virtual reality in dot-com boom #1. But as I say, I've always been fascinated by the opportunities of digital technology and what it can bring, and I've always explored it. And a person who was the victim of this at a very early age is Gus below me, because Gus actually gave me my first ever job when I left university. I run a brilliant company called Jacaranda, and I turned up and used to take all of his equipment and edit suites to pieces in the middle of the night and drive him generally mental. But at that point, I'll hand over to Gus and he can explain more about himself and probably more slander about me.
Yes, there's much to be said about that, and probably best left to a different forum. But yeah, as Cass says, my history is somewhat similar, though also different to his. I ran a film and video production company for 25 years, which we sold 5 or 6 years ago now, making film and video for corporate clients, notably, amongst which was the Body Shop, with whom we actually set up the company originally. So communication on a corporate level is my background. And as Cass says, ever since then, really, he and I have remained in touch and talked about setting up a business together, and never quite managed to do so until, well, what is now over a year ago, when he came up with the initial idea and we then turned it into a business.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you both. And again, just for the audience, so Gus might have to drop off slightly earlier before the end of the call, but hopefully that will be seamless. I would love, guys, to start right from the beginning and to really set the context for kind of the further discussion as part of my first question. So if you would be able to tell us from the initial idea, what was really the dream or end goal that you had for Splink?
So as I said, my background principally is factual television in all kinds of areas, science, history, everything else like that. But as also said, also interested in digital technologies and new forms of communication. And as I say, you know, that background in terms of TV was about a lot of it was about factual content, about education, about knowledge. And I, you know, and Gus and I would chew over this over many lunches. Actually, was really fascinated by what new technology was doing to the knowledge space, actually, how, you know, how new technology could enable people to gain knowledge in the same way that mass market television used to do, but is actually, as everybody can see, evolving very fast and finding new shapes and ways to do that. And from there became kind of really fascinated in different modes of kind of knowledge rather than documentaries, and became really interested in kind of how to content, things that told people how to do things, and that the internet was a fantastic way for people to learn really practical stuff as well as high level things. Looked around at that and kind of, you know, and looked at how people were doing it. A lot of people were doing it on YouTube, etc., but thought, well, inevitably, actually, challenge with that is how do you make any money out of YouTube as much as anything else, as I'm sure some people have experienced. And then really just kind of started to focus down on the fact that actually there were particular areas of education, knowledge, and understanding which were of really high value to people, and which they'd be willing to pay for products for. But that audience, which was a mass younger audience, actually the majority of them lived in the mobile space. They were using mobile devices in order to gain that knowledge. And from there, really, the thinking was, could we build a new generation of educational, knowledge-based products for the mobile generation and in the mobile space? And I think that remains the vision of what we're about, which is finding a really interesting new way to do educational software and educational products with evidence supporting them, but that are really appealing in their tonality and approach to, as I say, a mass market. Gus?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, that was the basic starting point, and I think it was then inevitably accelerated by Cassian's knowledge of James May, having worked with him on a number of broadcast programs, and a game of darts at the pub, at which the proposition was put to him, and he seemed sufficiently interested to come on board. And I think that's a key point, really. Our thinking from the outset was that there was a gap in the market to bring as Cass said, the tonality of broadcast television, but also the talent. So there's a lot of apps out there in the space that we're operating in, but they are frankly extraordinarily dull. So if we could find a way to bring talent to bear on that, to make the whole process exponentially more engaging, then it seemed to us there was a great opportunity there.
Yeah, fantastic. That makes a lot of sense, you know, leveraging the beauty of new technology with sort of some emerging needs around mobile learning. That's really, really great. And so what did you actually have to do to sort of make that dream happen?
Oh, God, quite a lot. More than we expected. I mean, truth be told, neither of us, you know, we didn't, we'd never made an app before. We didn't know how to do it. You know, I mean, we read lots of things about it and all the rest of it, but in order to do it, basically, oh gosh, we need to get a business plan together. We needed to kind of find a way to finance it and make it work, and most importantly, and why we're here, we needed to find a partner to actually help us scope, design, work out what we needed to do, and then actually build this app and then help us take it to market, which is where And Digital comes in.
Yeah, nice. So Joel, in that sense then, what is it that And had to do to help make that goal happen in the same way?
Yeah, sure. I think at ARN, we are focused on accelerating the build of digital products. So we usually do that by working, let's say, together with our client, making sure that we provide the right expertise on the table to kind of, yes, bring the concept to life faster and much more kind of efficiently. So by the time we kind of got introduced to Splink and Cassian, we had done it quite a few times with many other startups like Ordo, for example. And then we kind of felt quite secure on the fact that we could actually help them. So how we actually went about it is when we kind of heard about the brilliant idea, initially we kind of started with a discovery. It was about taking the idea down kind of to a lower level, exploring the proposition, looking at who are the user, what are the challenges, confirming that mobile was kind of a preferred channel where they will kind of learn. We did some kind of user research, some competition research as well. Research what will be kind of the framework that will enable people to learn quickly on the app. What other important thing that we did as well was all the technical approach that will underpin it, and that will actually help give some additional detail for the business plan around what are the cost implications, and what are the people that will be needed to do that. So this discovery phase was kind of, yes, exploring the problem and getting kind of down to a lower level. So once all the phase around business plan, funding was kind of agreed, we then went on with what we call a design and validation, where actually we put the concept in front of the user by having kind of low fidelity prototype and doing some guerrilla testing. So where a guerrilla test is actually, you went to meet the user outside of the test center to kind of have a chat with them and get much more feedback from them and adjusted the product. And then with that, we've been able to kind of have much more detailed journey mapping and a much more precise view of the what the product will be. And then after that, we then went on the build phase, building the feature, etc., and taking accompanying Gus and Cassian throughout the release on the App Store. So kind of, yeah, it was an end-to-end journey with them, and that's what we did.
Okay, nice. So it started with the business plan. Next step was finding the right partner, and then it was the kind of the discovery, moving into a build phase to get it to market.
Yeah,
okay, so then I think I'm quite interested in actually what it was around learning to drive that actually sparked the idea initially. I know you mentioned about James May and sort of and that connection, but what was really the eureka moment or that sort of dawning realization that made you focus on this area particularly?
I think there's a there's a fairly clear economic one, which is that there's 1.8 million people a year take their driving theory test in the UK, or at least they do when they're not in lockdown and the theory test sets are closed. Of all the tests in the UK, the large-scale tests in the UK, it is by far the largest. And I would say that helped. Part of our plan was and remains to focus on pass-fail tests that cost money to take. So we're not in the market of making more generalized educational apps, at least not at this stage. We're looking at those tests that, as I say, meet those criteria and the driving theory test is the principal one amongst those. It is, of course, because of that, a highly competitive market. There are a large number of driving theory test apps, some of which are almost quite good.
Ours even.
Okay, so it was really sort of opportunistic around a focused area where you thought you could add more value.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, as Gus says, it's 1.8 million people a year. I mean, it's the biggest test that is taken in the United Kingdom, so, and exactly as Gus says, and as he spotted, the simple paradigm, which is if it costs you £30 to take the test, you fail, you've got to pay another £30. But if you spend an extra £5, you get to pass first time, is a good, simple economic proposition to people.
And there's also the not insignificant point that 53% of people who take the test currently fail it, which is a remarkably high figure, and suggests either that the test is too hard, which is one possibility, or that the training and education behind passing it is currently inadequate.
Understood. So there's that kind of dual need there. Okay, great. So with I suppose that idea, and it was just an idea at the very beginning, and your business plan, what was it that you kind of originally saw as your biggest challenges for both you both as business partners, and what was really holding you back from stepping forward, as well as how did you solve them, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've touched on it before, which is that ultimately, truth be told, we'd never built an app before, and we didn't really know how to do it. And obviously we needed to find somebody to be a partner to do this. And Gus did a brilliant job of kind of looking around the space to find potential partners that there were. It was kind of 2 years ago now, almost exactly this time of year. I remember us, running around Hoxton et al. From one meeting to another, kind of meeting different companies, talking with them, etc., etc. And then we landed on Anne's doorstep, actually in Covent Garden, much posher address. So that felt good, it has to be said. And sat down and talked through, with Will Sargent, with various people, at the centre of And, etc., what the proposition and the idea was. And what was terrific was they got it. They understood what it was that we were trying to do. They were really excited by it, really excited by how we expressed what our ambition was and how that was going to work, and the combination of things that we were bringing together, and really got on side with it. And I think, it is worth saying we've touched on, our aspirations and dreams around the product, and certainly, bringing the world of television, etc., and a mass market, communication and entertainment to it was really important. The other thing that was really important to us was that it should be a really, really good product and should work really well and should be absolutely best in class. And there's some elements that we'll possibly get onto, which is also, it's not just James May being fun and approachable. There's a lot of really proven learning and educational technology and understanding that underpins the app to make it more successful for people to use. And as I say, we unpacked that, which is quite technical stuff with And they got it and gone on side with it as well. So it was a terrific meeting of minds, shall we say. And I think Joel's unpacked then the journey that they then took us from there, because we had no sense of, I think they said, right, we go into a discovery phase, and we kind of went, a what phase? We didn't quite understand those elements of it. So really from there, it was Anne kind of leading us by the hand through all the necessary steps of the process.
Great. And what about from a technical perspective? Is there anything that you can add there, Joel, in terms of what your teams really brought to the table, or how you complemented Cassian and Gus's skills?
Yeah, definitely. I think mainly, as I said before, really the big thing that we did is kind of bringing the right people on the table at different phases of the project. So to start with, we kind of brought product and UX specialists, because just to understand kind of the idea behind it, the challenge, the user, and kind of framing a story that we needed to kind of build. We also bring all the UX specialists that did all the research and kind of interacting with the actual end users and kind of tweaking the product and tweaking the idea. So those are kind of, at the beginning, the first kind of main skills that we brought on the table to kind of just get, yes, a better idea of what we will be building. Another thing that was quite important here as well is all the technical leadership that we brought, like during the discovery, because obviously we had some kind of constraint as well around what tech will we need to do this, and what will be the kind of the budget associated to it. So, instance, our mobile lead here, we chose to go with a React Native, which is, for people who don't know, it's a framework that allows to kind of build a code base across many platforms, iOS, Android, and even web, as opposed to native where we would have had two code bases. So we decided to go with React Native to kind of reduce a bit the cost for all this, because actually with what we needed to do and with the context of the app, it was enough to both get something quite nice and engaging for the user, and then having a kind of a code base that will allow us to, let's say, manage the cost better. So, and then still on top of that technical leadership, we had how do we implement actually all the logic, like the around learning and how we go about that, where do we store it? We chose to store it in the backend, but yeah, all that was kind of needed kind of to a good architecturing and a good planning with it. So, and then we brought in a designer, like the design system, the components, making something nice and slick for the users, all the kind of the design pattern that will be kind of supporting this. So we had a kind of a design person throughout the project. Then you have your software engineer that will actually do the job and deliver all this in React Native, knowing the code and etc. So that was kind of was key. But I think the main thing I want to have, the main thing that was actually really important here is the delivery leadership we brought. So we had a delivery lead we had set ourselves kind of the ambition to, let's say, deliver it within a certain time frame. So we had kind of we needed to lead it kind of quite in a tight way. So the delivery lead that we brought, she did kind of an amazing job at getting everybody together, like taking Gus and Cassian along the journey around what is agile, all the agile best principle of a delivery, making sure that all the prioritization was actually done properly, because again, certain constraint, we needed to kind of make sure that there was this ongoing prioritization around how we go about the product. She brought the team together. Everybody in the team was kind of aware of the challenges, what we're trying to achieve, and really, really working as a whole. And then everything around what's a good product and agile delivery was, especially in the context of a kind of a tight delivery. How did we kind of go about that? So that actually was key of the success of the delivery we did in this space. So yeah, that.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, understood. So it sounds like with that very clear idea and vision around where you needed to get to and what the constraints were, it was really about making that happen, which sounds brilliant.
Yeah.
And I'd love to focus a little bit on the user experience. You've both mentioned, or all of you have mentioned, about the importance of the quality of the end user experience to sort of stand out in a crowd of already existing products, but also build the most effective learning experience. I know that within the product, you use a technique called spaced repetition, but it would be great to explain for the audience a little bit more about that and actually what that is, if you wouldn't mind.
Cass, you're the expert on spaced repetition.
Am I? Oh, God. All right, fair enough. So spaced repetition, it's basically, so when we were exploring and we were looking at this space and all the rest of it and how it worked, we looked at the general market in educational apps, and there is, there are specific ones around driving theory. There are the kind of platform-based ones, which is kind of like Quizlet, et cetera, and Duolingo. And we were having a look at how those worked as well. And by virtue of digging into those and how they worked, and it wasn't really implemented, we came across a whole chunk of, learning science, as it were, kind of first devised by, as always with these things, by a slightly mad Russian in the 1970s. You always know you're onto a good thing if there's a mad Russian involved, who had basically done a lot of analysis about the process of learning and about how to optimize learning in order to hit a target point of a test or a goal, or even just to make sure that stuff sticks in your memory. And had come up with a whole algorithmic structure based around flashcards, and about how it is and with what frequency you present a question or a piece of information to a user in order to reinforce that learning. And that there's a repetition frequency which you need to do about stuff that the person already knows in order to bed it in. And then there's a different repetition frequency about stuff that they don't know, which you remind them about or nag them about on a more frequent basis. So you end up with quite a complex interleaved algorithmic approach to how it is that, given a certain amount of knowledge, you present that to a user over time with repetitions of certain pieces of information, whether they know them, you're recording whether they know them or they don't know them when they do learn them, such that given a target date, you optimize the amount of that information that they will have in their head by the time that you get to a target test date. And fascinatingly, I mean, all of this stuff work actually happened before the days of computers. It was literally physical flashcards and studying how people learn from physical flashcards. But obviously it is something that computing and digital technology lends itself to very effectively. And so with Sam, who was the kind of technology lead on this, we worked out how to render this spaced repetition approach around the content base of passing your driving theory test. And so basically when you use the app now, what happens is that you punch in when your test date is. We have training plans which give you a certain number of questions. The app calculates how many training plans you should be doing a day in order to get to the maximal point of knowledge, and then tracks every piece of information and whether or not you know it or you don't know it, and make sure that you re-see questions at a tempo which will most reinforce your knowledge of them. It's pretty cool, actually. And as far as we can tell from the reviews that we get, we seem to have the highest ratings for any driving theory test app out there. It works. And, you know, we've got bits of tracking in the app where people show us where they passed our tests, et cetera, et cetera. We've got brilliant reviews, but clearly it's really rather rewarding, actually. We are genuinely helping people pass their driving theory tests, which is terrific.
Yeah, brilliant. You're really hitting that outcome. And I love kind of the mixture of that science in making something happen when actually on the front end it just looks delightful and really simple.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean that's very true, which is another thing which is really important to us. For the user, they've got no sense of this happening at all. It's all under the hood. They just get a nice app, they punch in when their test is, and it tells them what they need to learn.
Yeah. And I guess technically speaking, Joel, is there anything you'd add to that in terms of how the app actually makes that happen and crunches through those algorithms?
Yeah, sure. As kind of Cassian say, it's all in the hood. The hood here is actually everything was kind of built in the back end of the app, like all the logic and how we will build it. And then what we did, because they're kind of on the space repetition, there are different frameworks that are out there in market. I think what we implemented in backend was kind of an adapted version of what they call the listener system. And then basically in that backend, you kind of track how many times kind of a given question is displayed to the user and how he responded to it. So you have to store that. Then you add another logic around how, for a given question, how many times does it have to be answered properly to consider that it's mastered? Because question had, let's say, different level of complexity. So we kind of, that's the second logic that you have to blend it in. And then the third one was around, for a given question, what is kind of the right amount of spacing do you need to kind of have and to display to the user and to make sure that he embeds the kind of the technique. So three key things here. Look simple. In fact, it was kind of a bit more more tricky to implement and to blend all that all in the back end of the app. One other thing that we kind of added on the whole thinking of the app was, and we discovered that during the discovery, if I must say, is just kind of when a question is given to the user, we don't display yet the options. We kind of leave it a couple of times to think to himself what could be the appropriate answer. And then afterward, he's got the kind of the question displayed and he can choose from them. We kind of discovered that as well will help kind of all the learning of the concept that is presented in the question. So yeah, put it simply, that's what we did. I won't bore you with anything more technical at this point.
That's really interesting. So it sort of sounds like you had a lot of theory and science behind how the algorithm worked, and then through discovery, you started to pick it apart a little bit. As part of that sort of user testing, for you, Cassian and Gus, was there anything that came out of the early user test which actually kind of dispelled some of your assumptions or surprised you in terms of what users actually said or how they best learn things?
I'm just going to flag. I think Gus might need to drop out because he's got an urgent thing. So you may be just left with me. But Gus, is there any last word you want to say? Or
yeah, apologies everyone. Apologies that I've got to dash. I think one of the things that we learned and that we're still learning is that despite our recommendation that everyone should spend 2 months revising for their driving theory test, in fact, generally people seem to be spending at most a week, and in some cases a couple of days, and that may well be something, a part of the reason why the failure rate is currently so high. That was certainly something we hadn't anticipated, and I think does have quite an effect. Anyway, thanks very much. Sorry I've got a dash, but Cass will look after you from here on in.
Thank you very much, Cass. Thank you. Anything you'd add to that, Cassian?
Yeah, I mean, it was when we were talking this through before, there was one thing that did strike us, which was that actually, to be honest with you, that there are interesting things about the behavior, but I think one of the upsides, at least from Anne's side, given the fact that this was all totally conceptual, was that interestingly, our sense or our approach of how the app should work actually proved pretty robust in terms of when we took it out to market and we tested it with people. And we were talking about this before, and I think it might come down to the fact that actually, although Gus and I don't have any experience in making, or didn't have any experience in making apps, etc., what we do have, and I particularly have, is decades of experience in telling stories. And how to tell stories that are meaningful to people and which keep them engaged over a period of time. And actually, in my head and in Gus's head, and in fact, collectively as a team in our heads, really, it was about us all making sure that the story, the journey that the app took the user on worked and made sense. And I think that is a kind of peculiar piece of transferable skill in a way, which is that you might not think it, but storytelling, obviously relevant to making films and making television, but actually, I think actually hugely relevant to making digital products as well, and particularly ones that are engaging to a mass market. You need to be able to give them a story to take a part in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then just touching a little bit on sort of that initial timeline and how that actually ended up playing out. Sort of, did you manage to get things to market in the time frame that you needed to, or that you imagined? Or I suppose, Joelle, is there any sort of insights or lessons learned along the way in terms of what changed and how that impacted things that it would be useful for the audience to know about?
Yeah, I think when we did the discovery, we estimated this build to be for about 24 weeks, something like that, 24, 25. But in practice, I think we added on a good, let's say 10 weeks on top of it. Like the main reasons to that are the first one around the, let's say, the design and the branding. So when we actually started the build of the app, I think all the kind of the thinking around which branding the app will have, and all the design and how it's going to land, it wasn't confirmed and kind of evolve along the way while we were doing kind of the build. So there were points where we had to kind of, let's say, roll back a bit of couple of components that were built to adapt that to the kind of changing branding and design. So that's kind of also one of the lessons learned from as we go. The second thing will be actually the complexity, because we talked about the space repetition framework, everything in the back end. Explain that it looks quite simple, but actually when we went into the crux of it, we actually realized that, yeah, there were some kind of concepts and components when it came to build it. If you wanted to keep something quite slick for the user, it wasn't that straightforward, and we had to kind of make some compromises along the way. So actually this second thing was actually very, very key into, the kind of, let's say, the additional weeks we had for the delay. And I think also for a brand new product, like when you build an MVP, there's so many areas where you can bring value to the customer, and it's kind of just coming from the case where we need to make, yes, the choices and take a direction that actually this is where we want to go, and decide that. So actually that's where kind of our delivery lead Alia, that she helped bring that on the table and help Gus and Cassian work through the prioritization. Okay, we can do this and this, but actually maybe the best way to approach it is that way. So that kind of also make us lose a few time along the way, but it was kind of, yes, good learning that we will have for the next phase. So those are kind of, let's say, the three main kind of things I can say around the why we stretched out a bit our timelines for the
understood.
I think it was, and we were discussing this before. I think it's the lesson I would take away from it, and I think Anne took away and Joel took away from it, is that, you know, I think probably in the Anne context, and indeed in almost all contexts, when you're making something, you're building on, and particularly in the digital product space, you're building on something before. At the very least, if you're working with a company, you've got a kind of corporate branding and identity that you can use and you can leverage. You've got a history there. Whereas I think the challenge was that in this one, there was no history. We were starting from absolute ground zero. And that does make it a bit more of a complex iterative process in the early stages about getting to, because you're not just designing a technology project, you are also mixed in with that as a brand identity as well. And all of them are, you know, there's a lot of flow backwards and forwards between the two. But we did get there. And as I'd say, Joel and the team were fantastically supportive about actually identifying that as a problem, because we were all a bit confused about, oh God, what, this doesn't seem to be going as well as it could. And we worked out that's the problem. This is how we need to solve it. And again, just to repeat Joel's shout out to Alia Khan, who came in to kind of run the project and lead it, who was just fantastic, and then just picked that baton, ran with it, but also broke it down into really clear, digestible steps and option points and pivot points, which we could all use to get to the end point.
Yeah, brilliant. So a lot around the collaboration piece there in terms of overcoming challenges. I wonder, as well as the sort of technology and delivery side of things, what about from a content perspective? Sort of what was that process of taking a really lengthy, dense book of content and actually transforming that into a mobile experience with, you know, much less space to play with in terms of how it can look absolutely brilliant and again be really effective in terms of that learning experience and being able to digest that information effectively?
Sure. And I think, well, with that, I mean, it goes back to what Gus was saying, which is, yeah, you've got the big book with all of the information. You have some other not terribly good apps, and the majority of people fail when they're using those learning tools. So what we did, or what was really important to us, was to take a look at these and these assets which existed, because actually a chunk of the content of the app is licensed from the DVSA, but to think about how it is, well, what can we do with this licensed content, which actually we weren't particularly allowed to change, to make it more engaging, more appealing, more understandable, and more digestible to the user. And there were kind of two key things that we did there. First of all was just about the organization of the content. So if you buy yourself a driving theory test book or whatever, all of the content is divided into, 13, I think it is, categories. But the categories are completely random, or not completely random, but they have no real bearing on your real world experience of driving and your real world experience of the world itself. So what we did was we completely recategorized the whole asset base into categories and structures which were much more relevant to the user. So I'm trying to remember what the original ones are. I can't quite, but ours are now just simply, you know, questions about setting off, questions about city streets, questions about rural roads, cock-ups, typical James May phrase, basically when things go wrong, and the paperwork, which is the stuff you need to have sorted before you can drive. And so this stuff, which is, you know, for anybody is a bit dull, let's be honest with it, and James embraces it, we were able to make structure in a way which was more memorable and more kind of digestible for people by just restructuring it all into a much more kind of real world experience. And then the second thing was obviously the contribution of James. And throughout the app, we've got videos from James for all of these categories, who basically takes those areas and actually just distills them to the 4 or 5 things you really need to know. Because a theory test is actually, most of it is actually common sense. But he does that, and there's a whole series of videos through the app where he takes those key areas and just takes you on a bit of a journey, which is classic James May. So it's filled with really good knowledge, but it's also screamingly funny. And at the end of that, having watched each of those videos, you come away with the principles that you need to know. So I think it was those combination of things which allowed us to kind of transform the content offer from, you know, what's out there in the standard place into something that was just much more, yeah, user-friendly, I suppose would be the way, and engaging and fun and enjoyable.
Nice. Yeah, that's a really good summary. And I think actually it's quite a nice segue to sort of think about the ed tech space a little bit more holistically, if you don't mind. Because I suppose what you're highlighting is it's a really sort of emerging space, and there's a lot of opportunity for people to be doing things more effectively by leveraging technology. And I think we're obviously seeing that more and more, especially now with COVID, in terms of how do you do online learning, whether it's for employees or consumers at sort of the kind of end state of things. What excites you about the innovation in this area particularly? And we did touch a little bit upon why you chose mobile as the kind of primary platform for this particular experience, but it'd be great to just sort of reiterate why you chose mobile over desktop or other options, if that's all right.
Yeah, I mean, underpinning it, there's a kind of it's always good to have a passion in these things, I think it said, and for both Gus and I, there's an underlying passion driving why we're in this space. As said before, I went to work for Gus out of university. He had a production company with The Body Shop, and I don't know if people will remember, some probably a bit young, some people, but The Body Shop was founded by this amazing woman called Anita Roddick when it was first set up, which had and alongside the fact that it sold kind of lovely shampoo and all the rest of it, Anita had a very powerful sense of social mission about what she wanted to do and about changing the world in terms of green and recycling and all the rest of it, a real groundbreaker in that. But also, even with the staff of The Body Shop, a real sense of mission about enabling their passions and allowing them, giving them the tools to engage with the world. And actually, a lot of the videos that Gus and I made in those days were absolutely aimed at that objective. And then from there, I went on and worked in kind of telly. And again, it was about factual television, documentaries, history, science, etc., etc. But the through line between both what I was doing and Gus and I were doing when we were working together, and then my later career, is that if there's one thing that really infuriates me or really makes me angry, is how many people find the process of learning or gaining knowledge something that they have painful, humiliating memories of, that they've gone to school and it was just a miserable experience, and that they just felt that they were being made to feel stupid, and they feel alienated from, I mean, I'm really lucky. I enjoy learning. I had a really pleasurable experience. But for so many people, it's a nexus or a kind of knot in them of kind of inadequacy. And I think that's terrible because it shouldn't be like that. And so the objective, as I say, what I do with telly, what I do with the BBC, and the objective of this app and Splink as a whole is to find ways to help people learn stuff and to get over those past experiences, to find knowledge and learning to be a pleasure and an enjoyable experience, and to make it something that opens your horizons rather than makes you feel small. And so ultimately, that's the mission underpinning Splink, which is educational software for a new generation, but with those tonalities and those values. And the vision and ambition is really to stretch our offer beyond driving tests to other areas of knowledge. And sorry, just in terms of the opportunities, I mean, we've kind of touched on them, which is, the other thing is, worked in television, all the rest of it, that is now just one small subset of a huge landscape of educational products, educational technology, educational content. And I really love, and it's great, the dashboards with the app. It's just fabulous to see, hundreds of people download it every day, and you can track their progress, and you can see how many quizzes they're doing and how many hazard perception videos they're completing, and whatever it is that they're doing. And unlike telly, because you've got that dynamic feedback loop, you can optimize and make your product better and better. And that's the thing that I also think is really brilliant about working in the digital space. You've got making telly, you just make it and you put it out and it's over. This is a fantastically iterative process where you can renew and you can expand and you can make things better and better.
Yeah, I love that. I particularly, just to summarize, it's that democratization of learning, which is just a fabulous vision and thing to have front and center. I'm just conscious of the time. I'll ask Joelle if you've got anything to add to that in terms of what you particularly think's exciting about EdTech. And then Cassian, if you just want to have any last sort of advice around what you'd say to somebody or other people on the call who are just getting started with a new product idea, and then we'll swiftly move on to questions from the audience.
Yeah, awesome. So I will try to be quick, because my take on this is one of our ambitious goals for ANN for 2025 is to make sure that we kind of bridge the digital skills gap and improve the digital skills and knowledge of about 200,000 plus people. So that's kind of actually the opportunity of EdTech here is quite bang on, is quite aligned with it, where especially given the context with COVID, where lots of people have to do home skilling, how can we use actually tech to actually have a positive impact on people's life? So actually having this app and working on this is fairly aligned with kind of where we want to be and what we're trying to achieve within ANN. And kind of a good testimony for that is when we actually were doing this app, we didn't have any issues finding volunteers within ANN to do tests, user survey, etc., because people were so passionate about one, the disruption that the app was bringing, but also it's kind of an interesting space to be, where actually given the impact on people's life and impact that a kind of tech can have on the day-to-day of the people. So that's kind of what I would say in terms of, yeah, short answer in this case.
And just in terms of advice, I would say, so I think if you're doing this, and I think this is what helped us, is have a really clear idea of what your target market is, and then have a really clear idea of what your differentiators are going to be in that target market. Why are you going to be better and different? And then the third thing you really need to do is find a brilliant partner like Anne to deliver it.
Great. Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. On that note, we will go to some of the questions. A few of them are probably more comments, so I might skip over those ones and reply to people separately. But there are a few people asking around your overall commercial strategy. So one which is around what informed your decision to use a one-time pricing strategy versus others like freemium or in-app purchases or subscription models. And then in the same sort of area, what's your market growth strategy? How are you going about that as well?
Yeah. So the reason that we went for a kind of one-time payment strategy is because we were starting out, and two, because it's the simplest way to approach it. You know, and there's proven market, or there's that business model is proven in the marketplace, because the top 2 selling apps in the UK are also, you know, upfront payment driving theory apps. And certainly that's worked very well for us. But on the other hand, as I say, you know, that doesn't mean that we're precluding other business models. So, you know, that was the simplest, easiest one to start with, but that actually we are evolving, as it were, the product suite. And so now we have a cut down free version in the Android space, which then drives people to convert to the fully paid version. So you get to do 1 training plan a day. We're monitoring how that's working in terms of conversions. We can't do it in the iOS store because Apple, as people probably know, are much more antsy about 2 similar products in the space, in the free and the paid. But we're going to monitor that and monitor that conversion. And going back to what I was saying about the wonders of working in this space, is it's fantastic because we can get really live feedback about what's working and what converts people, etc., etc. So at the moment, we've kind of got a paid and a free kind of business operation, and we may well move to a freemium one at some point. We just want to test out what all the optionalities are around it. In terms of the growth strategy, I think this is one of the ways, one of the elements of our growth strategy, which is to move from just being a paid product to also having free or freemium options in it. The other element that we're looking at, in terms of these products, is, you know, one of the lessons for us, which has been, you know, interesting, which we weren't quite aware of, is you do have to put a bit of money into marketing and advertising, etc. So we're continuing to do that. And then it's also about optimizing how we can use James, who's a brilliant talent in the social media space, to communicate more about the app and to drive more sales. And then last of all, we've got some other products in our head as well, but that's the basic sense.
Great. Okay, a few follow-up questions on those. So on the first one, so you mentioned about that approach differently on Android versus iOS. Is that informed by the features available on those different stores, or is it, do you have different user behavior?
It's informed by Apple's policies. So in the Google store, you can kind of do whatever you want, whereas Apple don't like to see, they've got a kind of policy against people taking a product and doing multiple different versions of that product in the marketplace. They want you to just do one. So there are ways around it, but we're trying to work out how to do those, because the other challenge is, if you want to diversify your product portfolio, it's how do you do that while you are not losing the benefit, which we have, is, you know, an app store ranking of 4.9, you know, 600 5-star reviews and all the rest of it. So you also want to bear that in mind in terms of how you evolve your presence in these marketplaces.
Understood. And then somebody's asked here, so obviously you've been featured in the App Store as App of the Day quite a few times now. Yeah. How do you think you make that happen? Did you get in touch with Apple beforehand?
No, they got in touch with us. I think it comes from making a very good product with and. That's what I would say. No, they came to us and said, we'd like to feature you, and have featured us a number of times now, and we're talking about whether they want to do it again. I mean, I think it comes back to those things I was saying, which is, you know, it was a very clearly focused product in a really defined market, which Apple knew there was a lot of traffic in, with very clear differentiators, including James May, you know. And I think for them, it felt and continues to feel like something they could also shout about. It felt like something new and fresh and valuable.
Brilliant. Yeah, that they're quite hard to please, I've often found. So I think if you make something brilliant, they'll put you up there, but they have a very high bar. So that's
They do,
great.
yeah.
In terms of, so Ian's asked a question around really what's next for Splink. So obviously you've been in the store for 7 months or so now. As we've said or mentioned already, you've been featured in Apple's App of the Day. But what's really next for either the app, but also Splink? What next topic are you going to tackle in the learning space?
Well, I can just see a question going by here, which I'll tackle first, which is, yes, we do have a bit of a challenge at the moment, which is a bit of a pain, which is that obviously we've got a product which is passing your driving theory test. In order for that to be relevant in the market, there have to be people doing their driving theory test. And at the moment, there's a pandemic lockdown, which means that nobody is sitting their driving theory test. So at the moment, we're in a slightly frustrating phase where we're kind of in hold. We've got a bit of traffic going through, and actually it has been a useful phase because we've been able to try out this new free version, etc., etc. But thing one is we want to get out of lockdown and we want to get back to being muscular in the market with, back to 1.8 million people sitting driving theory tests every year. So that's going to be really important. But beyond that, I mean, I think the key things that we're looking at is, one, how do we expand this product? So we've talked about the freemium element of it. One of the things we're exploring is, can we add more elements within the app, and indeed freemium additional content layers, particularly around practical driving tests, which we think there's a market, and James doing videos around that we think would have strong appeal. And then also, as Gus was saying earlier, our fundamental thing is around skills-based tests that people have to pay to pass. And there's a number of other those out there in the market that we would that we want to explore. Most particularly, there's a bunch of certificates you need if you want to work on any building site in this country. So that's 400,000 people a year have to sit these tests. And we see an opportunity to leverage the tech stack that And builds for us, because it is the same educational paradigm, and then convert that into different similar products.
Understood. Sounds great. Just a more specific one from Michael, just on the subject of marketing. And how successful has the cashback and driving instructor referral scheme been?
Good question. Not as successful as we would have thought, actually. I mean, we've had in our strategy, Gus and I have kind of continually looped back to, well, if we can just get the driving instructors on side, then that will really help us in terms of marketing. The brutal truth, though, is that driving instructors are a notoriously flighty bunch. And actually, truth be told, with driving instructors also, they work on very tight margins in terms of what they're doing. So they're very focused just on what it is that they're doing. So thus far, not a lot of success. But on the other hand, also for the last 6 months, nobody's been sitting any tests, or it's been on and off. So we think there's further opportunities with both of them. But the one, being really honest with you, the one that's really working is this free version. That's the thing that's really driving the conversions at the moment.
Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. A broader question for you both, perhaps, but what was really the lowest or hardest point along the journey so far? And that's a question from Ian.
Good question. I think, there were no awful moments in it. I mean, it was, both Gus and I, and thankfully the AND team as well, look on every challenge as an opportunity to learn. But genuinely, we do. But I would say the most difficult bit, and I don't think Joel would agree, was this bit where we'd done all of the discovery phase. We knew what we wanted to do, and we'd gone into production, as it were. And then after a few weeks, it just felt like we were stuck and we weren't going anywhere. And we're kind of going round and round in circles, really. And as I said before, it was really down to Joel and his team being really good at stepping back and identifying the problem, and that this problem being that, in fact, we were trying to solve for 3 problems simultaneously but hadn't quite realized it, which was, what's the brand, what's the design, what's the product? And as I say, and Joel in particular were really good at digging us out of that kind of swamp, that quicksand, and moving us on, and I think that was the one bit where we thought, oh God, we really don't know what the hell we're doing, and this is just going to be a disaster. And actually it wasn't. It was just about shifting the way we were thinking and approaching the problem.
Yeah, I echo that totally. That's really what happened. So maybe the thing that I could be adding to what Cassian just said in terms of maybe lessons learned from it, and then things that next time we could be doing differently. It's just that for similar kind of product, I want to say, having a very good idea of what your MVP is and investing the time upfront into getting down the requirement, how it's going to look like, and then looking to the complexity, spending some time to look into what is kind of the brand, the design, how we're going to go about that, like maybe hitting that pause and conceptualize better the product before getting into build is probably kind of a one thing to kind of bear in mind for kind of for the next time. Maybe yes, just kind of investing the time in grooming the requirement and making the story kind of a stick. So maybe that's kind of could be one of the key main learning that I will have here. The second is maybe starting doing the hard things first, like the complexity, the big chunk of components that we think or suspect will be tricky. Starting that very, very upfront in the kind of the delivery is kind of quite useful. And then, yeah, the last thing I would say, this togetherness, like walking, and that's kind of what Ali brought properly here. Taking kind of Cassian along the journey, we were really tight knit with the team. Everybody was involved, knew the challenge, knew how kind of was coming next, and everybody was quite motivated. So yeah, those are kind of the three things I will add on to.
I'd agree.
Brilliant. Thank you both. I think that's a really nice point, with no questions left, to just wrap up. And again, thank everyone for coming, and thank you both, and Gus as well, for just taking us on that journey of, you know, what the initial idea was to how you approached it as partners, and also some of the challenges that you had along the way, as well as the absolutely brilliant results you've got so far, Cassian. That must be really, really satisfying to see, and we wish you all the success for the future of the app and your next ventures too. So thank
you very much,
everyone.
Thank you.
A pleasure.
Just to recap, the recording will be shared, and there will also be contact details. If you'd like to chat to either myself or Joelle or any of our other team at And Digital, do get in touch either via the contact details or LinkedIn as well. Thanks, everybody.
And I'd just say, if anyone does have a question for Gus or I, you know, contact these folks, and I'm sure they'll forward it on. We quite happily provide any further advice if anyone wants it.
Thanks, Cassian. That's brilliant.
No problem at all.
Thanks
Thank
all.
you, Christian. Thank you, Antonia. Bye, all.